go.
And apprehension, haunting suspicion that we have
You're muted.
Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to Drawing Down the Stars. I'm Snappy, and I'm here today with my good friend Graham. How's it going, Graham?
Great, thanks. How are you?
Amazing. And we were just listening to your band, Isosceles Infection. What was the track there?
That's Recurrence.
Recurrence. Amazing. And we're here today to actually deep dive into the lyrics of your band, the Isosceles Infection, over your last two EPs, because you're getting ready to release a hardcover book for this, right?
Yeah, it's going to be a book of the lyrics from the first two EPs as well as the new album's lyrics. It's going to be a thin little hardcover with some artwork in it as well.
Really excited about this. That's so much fun. So let's start. Tell us about the band. How long have you guys been together? Why did you start? What have you released, and where are you going?
Right. So we're actually a very new project. We started in January, if you could believe it.
Oh,
From I was in a band with with some of the guys called Ghost of Shadow Moses, and they were originally an instrumental band, and I joined as a vocalist for a few albums, and then we decided they want to do instrumental music again. So one of the guys and I came up with the idea of doing this new project, the Isosceles Infection, and exploring the more progressive side of the heavy music.
beautiful.
And with each release, we've sort of acquired new members. So with the first EP, it was just John and I. Then with the next one, it was Dave, John, and I. Now it's Ron, John, Dave, and I.
Amazing. So you're kind of a full band now. And you were telling me too, you guys are getting ready to release a full-length album, right? And this lyrical book will accompany that. So what's the album called, and what's that about?
So the album's called Insight. We're going to read a bunch of the lyrics from it today. And the overall concept, I guess, we were, some of us were in a pretty dark period this year and needed a bit of a light in our life. And we decided to, that inspired me to write a bunch of these lyrics and one of the guys to start writing more songs. And it's very much about life and all of its messiness and glory, the triumph of living alongside the darkness, not in spite of darkness, but with darkness, and looking at darkness and pain as an element for transformation as opposed to a barrier that one has to overcome.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. I love that. So I want to pull this image up here. So this was from your guys' first EP, you were saying?
Yeah. So this artwork was designed by my friend Austin Weber. This is actually a larger piece, but this is a little snapshot of the image. And this EP is titled Ick, and the full title is The Debilitating Effects of Ichthyopterius multifilius in Osteichthyes, which is a long-winded way to say witnessing the effects of a parasitic infection. Ick is the common term for this infection, and it occurs in freshwater tropical fish or freshwater fish in general. When I was growing up, I had a tank of freshwater tropical fish, And being someone with not many friends growing up, these fish were very much my companions. I spent many hours watching them, contemplating them, reading alongside of them. And when they succumbed to this infection, it was painful, to be honest. I know it's silly to say that it's grieving over fish, but they really were a big, a core part of my life and my balance at the time.
No, I can imagine. And then watching them die slowly from an infection as a youth, that leaves a lasting impression, and there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, just you do all you can, and then you hope for the best, and then it doesn't work out, and you just watch them perish. I've,
Wild.
I've had similar things with people in my life, so it felt like a good reflection of that.
Yeah. And we can all be so close to our pets. Don't underestimate the love of a pet. It's a powerful emotion to tap into. Sometimes because animals don't have that same level of connection as people, we wind up forming closer bonds with them, for those reasons, because they're not as judgmental and as harsh as people.
Definitely, I could count on one hand the number of human friends I had growing up. So pets were always some of my closest companions.
Beautiful. All right, so let's get into this, Graham.
Sure.
What is it? So this is the ick we were talking about.
This is
Here's
the title, yeah. So
yeah.
ichthyopherius multifilius is just the Latin term for the disease, and it means, I believe, louse with many children,
Wow,
because it spawns so many offspring, like thousands upon thousands
that's
of
crazy.
baby parasites. And Osteichthyes is just the Latin term for fish. We
Interesting.
felt like going with something long-winded for the progressive music.
Right? Very Prague. Love it.
Yeah. So here's some of the lyrics off of the first EP. I'll just read them, then we'll talk about it. This is Breathless. An ache in my chest, all laid to rest. Desperate attempts to save you were all in vain. Now I am left breathless. Gaping hole where you once thrived, eaten alive by parasites. The agony in your eyes haunts me to this day. My only consolation is that your suffering has finally ceased to torment you and me.
Wow, that's such intense imagery and emotions. Wow.
Thank you. So a lot like we were talking about, just before, of seeing the slow debilitating effects of an illness in somebody or something, and watching it slowly, consume them.
And it's that wild shift, right, where death becomes saving grace. And that's always such a intense moment, you know? Of
Definitely, death is a release and a transformation.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Let's go to the next one. This is Quarantine. So thematically, this would technically go before the other one, but the way the lyrics kind of work out, anyways. I'll just read it. Tremble not with fear. I'm doing this for you so that you can be free. Free from this sickness that's slowly killing every one of you. Please forgive me for what I am about to do. This isolation is only temporary. Transplant, contain, I administer the sacred remedy. I bow before the statue. Invoke the ancient rites of mysteries. Praise the god Asclepius. In still water with the essence of divinity.
Oh wow. This is an interesting
So
one.
this is about when fish are infected with ick. What you have to do is transplant them into smaller containers and quarantine them for a period of time until while administering medicine, so that it can kill off all and starve all of the parasites. And so this is, but the quarantining the fish can be quite stressful for them. It causes a lot of psychological duress and physical duress. So this is about, again, please forgive me. You know, this is only temporary, and I'm doing this for you. This is like an attempt to save them.
Oh gosh, that makes me think so much of our own quarantine that we went through a few years back, right?
For
Best of
sure.
intentions, right? But so intense of a moment for many. And wow. And
Absolutely.
it's wild too that you bring up Asclepius because, within the rites of Asclepius, there is that creation of the potion, the sacred waters that restore. And there
Mhm.
is this idea of the separation as well. You enter into the temple of Asclepius and you sleep in the temple, in the dark, in the depths. You go into that cave and you would sleep with snakes, who would whisper into your ear. So there's this whole thing too. Also with the snakes, there's this imagery of the snake goes into that hole, right? And it's in that hole that they shed their skin and give birth to their eggs, and then they come out renewed. So there's this imagery deep within the Greek mythology about going into the dark, into the cave, into the depths, in order to be transformed and to reform, right?
Exactly, exactly. And I literally did pray to Asclepius during that time. I said I don't believe in gods, like I believe in divinity, but not in the God. But I was desperate and looking for faith, as many people are in dark times.
That's the essence of magic, right? Crying out in desperation, in frustration and futility, like a child for their mother, honestly, right? You see this so much. The greatest, most powerful rites in the Greek tradition, right, come from Eleusis. And what is that? A mother crying after the loss of her daughter, you know? The power of mourning, mourning for dead Adonis, mourning for dead Osiris. Wild.
Yeah. So now there was only 3 songs on the first EP, so I just wanted to read a couple. This brings us to the second release, which is called Dream Eater. And this artwork is a public domain image. It's a painting by Jean-Paul Riopel, and it really captured the haunting presence that I was thinking of when I was writing these lyrics of this amorphous presence, for lack of a better word, to repeat myself, that slowly consumes you. And
Wow.
I wrote these lyrics, I guess, late April and May. So this would have been just following my electroconvulsive treatment that didn't end up working. And I was this was a lot of the lyrics in this were a way to process my frustration and discouragement.
Beautiful. I love that. Amazing. Can you talk a little bit more about the title Dream Eater?
Yeah, so Dream Eater, it's like the thing that devours all of your ambitions, whether it be illness, trauma, poverty, sickness, life in general. It's about the aspects of life that make you want to give up.
Wow. So intense.
So here we have recurrence. This is the sample from this we used at the beginning of the stream. Dread and apprehension, a haunting suspicion that we have been here before. This perpetual recurrence, all our greatest torments returning to life.
Oh, wow. This is intense. And immediately I think of Nietzsche, right? The eternal occurrence, which he gets from the Hellenistic tradition, right? This idea that life is this ever repeating circle until we can learn to refine ourselves and, like the Visca Pisces, exit.
Exactly. The context of this was trauma flashbacks and how it's like you can't move past the experience. The experience keeps becoming your present over and over again until you can learn to live with it or overcome it or break free from that cycle.
Wild. It's so beautiful. Haunting suspicion that we've been here before. It makes me think too of that deja vu. Many of us have these feelings in our life like we've been here, maybe in another way at another time, but we've done this before. Why are we doing it again? What is there to gain from this, right?
Exactly. We often revisit the same stages, the same moments in life, but from different perspectives and different periods of growth, right?
Beautiful. Well said. Very true.
This is mirage. Fog from your breath obscures a silhouette, eyes that flicker in the dark. It is not human. You can see three horrid faces. You return each night for it to drain more life from you. Banish this mirage, white knuckles in a stranglehold. Fingers splinter from the force. Banish this mirage.
Wow.
For those who have my anthology, The Shape of My will recognize this as adapted from a poem called Chimera in that collection. And I wrote this because I was having, related to trauma once again, having PTSD nightmares. And it's also about psychosis, this presence that's sapping your energy and you can't break away from it. And it's about the struggle with this presence.
Yeah, it's so intense. I keep thinking too of this underworld kind of demonic force imagery that you see so often, right? Three horrid faces stood out to me. Makes me think of Cerberus or those three-headed monsters that you see, right? Return to you each night to drain more energy from you, which is wild too. It makes you think of that succubus or incubus type
Yeah,
imagery and this idea of being drained. You know, I used to have sleep paralysis every once in a while when I was younger, and it used to feel like something was like on top of me, you know? And it's such a
that's
scary, intense thing.
yeah, very.
But I love this too. The banish this mirage, white knuckled in a strangle hold, fingers splintered from the force. You know, you're calling down that force into your body and your rage in that, and you're doing everything you can to call that image to go away. I so relate with this. When I was younger, I used to have these recurring nightmares constantly of this raven that would like follow me. And when it would eventually get me, it'd rip me to shreds and eat me up.
Oh
And it would
wow.
just keep happening and keep happening. I was quite young. And it got so bad to the point where as soon as I was about to fall asleep, I'd have panic attacks and wake up. And it just happened in these cycles again and again and again. And eventually, what broke it, I remember just getting super upset and just out of exhaustion and anger and just being like, no. And then I fell asleep. And that's how it was for a while. I was able to sleep because of that, pushing myself to exhaustion. And eventually I learned like what you do here, banish the image. I recognized at some point that I could go anywhere in the dream and that I could tell the raven to go away. And it no longer bothers me. But
That's
wild learning experience, you know?
Yes, absolutely. That's beautiful. And I think, you like you said, it requires will to overcome these things. You had to, out of desperation, you find the strength.
Well, that's one of the interesting things is that when we're put in these intense situations, that's why they say what doesn't break you makes you stronger, because you learn to adapt and overcome. You're forced to do something that you wouldn't have done before, and then you recognize and you've gained from that experience. What it opened up for me was just this ability. It doesn't work all the time, but if I can recognize them in a dream, I can usually turn it into a lucid one pretty easily and go have fun, you know? And a lot of people are envious of that kind of stuff, but it came out of that nightmare.
Exactly. My dreams are pretty much hell. I've always tried to lucid dream, and I've
Oh,
never found the ability. But it fascinates me hearing about people that can.
it's a difficult thing and it doesn't always work. And sometimes still things come and stop you, I think a lot of it has to do with mental control. And I mean, if you're prone to bad dreams, it's going to be really hard, right?
Yeah, true.
Because you're it's all about that power of belief. But if you're in this, if you've experienced the horrors, you anticipate the horrors, breaking that cycle is like it takes a lot. Takes a lot.
It
Wow.
does.
Wild imagery, Graham.
Thank you.
Sending love.
Much love. This one is called Eyes. What I see is not what you see. Lost in a world of illusion. Shifting patterns, stretching sky, walking through a sea of eyes. Every moment screams for me to merge with this reality. So, this one is about psychosis. You know, what I see is not what you see. Lost in a world of illusion. So the perceptual distortions I experience, the sea of eyes is not only paranoia, but I literally have a delusion often that there's an eye that I can't see behind my head that's watching everything I do.
Oh, wow. That's so scary and intense. Can you speak a little on your diagnosis and on your experience for those who may not be familiar?
Right. So for those new to the channel or to our streams, I was diagnosed a few years ago with schizoaffective disorder, which is sort of like it's a schizophrenia spectrum disorder that has a mood disorder component as well, similar to bipolar. So it's like being schizophrenic and bipolar at the same time. And a lot of it's very difficult, something I struggle with every day, taking medications, trying different treatments. Um, but it's something that will always be with me that I have to learn to live with.
Right. Let's talk a bit about this first line here. What I see is not what you see, lost in a world of illusion. You've described this kind of feeling to me many times in many different poems. And I just want you to elaborate on this for others so that they can understand how the illusions come in and how you recognize them as illusions.
Right. So quite often it's perceptual distortions like patterns, shifting patterns. You know, patterns will be moving or objects will look like they're stretching or moving. Sort of like for those who have used psychedelics, that's really the best way to describe it. Is like it's like taking a bunch of LSD every day. You know, the way that patterns sort of shift and blend, objects blend into other objects. And I've had full on hallucinations of like people not that aren't real. And it was for a long time, it was a struggle to recognize what I was experiencing was not what other people experience. And I learned this being open about my symptoms very early on in childhood, and people saying, "You're making it up for attention. It's just your imagination, overactive imagination." And things like that. And so the dismissal of my experience made me realize that I was not alone in my experience because there are other people with my diagnosis, but I felt alone.
Right. You felt like you were perceiving something totally different than everyone else and no one could understand, right?
Exactly.
Which is
Exactly.
so wild. And this makes me really think of your short story about your neighbor that you wrote there, because it comes from that is not an illusion in the visual sense. That's an illusion that built over your anxiety over months. And then, but you were able to channel that into art and have an okay relationship with your neighbor in spite of this. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Sure. So the short story is called My Neighbor Wants to Kill Me, and it's based off of partly an inside joke with my band that my neighbor was being kind to me because he wanted to kill me, and partly because of a paranoid delusion of that belief. And it took a lot of willpower to talk myself through these emotions and these thoughts. You know, when I was younger, I had a similar paranoid delusion that one of my psychiatrists was trying to poison me with medications that were giving me bad side effects. And I eventually stopped seeing him and was terrified of doctors for years. And it took him a long time to build that trust again with a health practitioner. And for the better, because I was able to get more well because of that. And I had to remind myself of that experience when I was having these delusions of like, It's very, it's just a matter of telling myself that I don't have evidence for this. All I know is that my neighbor is being kind to me. So why don't I reciprocate the kindness? And now I have actually have a very good relationship with my neighbor. We're pretty good friends.
That's beautiful. It's that power of reason, right? Relying on reason and sharing with others. Like you said, you shared this with your closest friends, your bandmates, who, knowing you, were able to laugh with you and were able to help you through it. And then again, that creative aspect of art, right? It's like your reason, your friends, your art. And that's how you're able to process.
Well said. Well said.
I love it. Beautiful. Let's continue here.
Sure. So now we come to the title track, Dream Eater. A million years of fractal hunger trace the shape of my despair. It feeds off my dreams. Each path leads to ruin. Emaciated and insane, my eyes are lost in its gaze. Life is an illusion eagerly devoured.
Oh, wow.
So this is writing about my schizoaffective once again, and these suicidal. I struggle with suicidal thoughts pretty much daily. Every minute of every day, I have intrusive thoughts and images of ending my life. And this is very much about that. It's about, it feels like a million years since I've existed, of this hunger for life, this hunger for normalcy. And it traces the shape of my despair. It shapes you over time, these experiences.
But this is so also so mythologic and, for lack of a better term, demonic in a sense. Million years of fractal hunger, right? That fractal imagery of chaos embodied that traces the shape of my trace the shape of my despair. So it comes to form in your despair. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah,
That's wild. And then it feeds off my dreams. Each path leads to ruin. It's like it's guiding you and it's feeding you no matter where you go.
exactly.
Emaciated and insane, my eyes are lost in its gaze. This is terrifying. Confronting that shape, gazing into the eyes. This is something you see in a lot of people's dreams, in a lot of horror imagery. Can you talk about that a bit?
Sure. So, the power of the gaze is definitely magical. Like Medusa and some others that I can't think of off the top of my head.
Medea,
Medea.
Helios, the muse herself. It's all in the power of the gaze, in that perception, right? That's Eternian magic. To see is to hold something in time. It's a violent act, it's wild.
Exactly. It's just about the violence of the gaze being stripped bare in the face of this ever watching presence and becoming lost. The more you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes into you, right? And it's about not being sure where my illness ends and I begin.
Right.
If they are the same thing, if they're separate things, because the brain is part of the body after all. But the way that my mind constructs the narratives is something that I have to distance myself from, if that makes sense, and otherize.
Absolutely. This last line here, life is an illusion, eagerly devoured. What do you mean by life is an illusion?
Sort of how everyone perceives reality slightly differently based on how our eyes and our brains are wired, right? It's the body creates a unique perception that is generally shared among everything, but it's almost like reality is like an egregore of sorts. It's sort of like this it's there, but how we relate to it is unique and individual,
Right. I get where you're getting at.
and it's
No,
eager. but eagerly devoured, eagerly devoured by the dream eater, but also eagerly devoured by us. We revel in life. Even those who disdain it revel in the experience of pain, and that's
That
part of
is
the reality.
that is one of those wild things about people, that we're both drawn and pursue acts of life and acts of death in equal measure often. There's great pleasure in destruction. There's great pleasure in waste. We've talked about this at length with George Bataille, right? The creation of art itself is waste. It's wasteful. It's beauty for beauty's sake, and it's magical because of the waste. But fundamentally, it's this act towards destruction. It serves no purpose. It goes against what we would think of as needed and necessary. It's such a wild thing, and some people can't get out of that pursuit of death. They can't balance it with that pursuit of life. You know, and there is this sense of wanting to devour and destroy things. You see this, right? Where love can turn to violent sex, and it's about that destruction of the self and the other in the pursuit of both destruction and pleasure. They become the same thing, right?
The enjoyment of food. What is food but things that were once living, that we're consuming, whether it be plants, fungi, animals.
Such
It's
a good point. And
and
that
we,
pleasure
we
is so
eagerly devour it, derive pleasure from food, or many people do, anyways.
no, that's such a good point. Food is such a perfect analogy, right? And it's that, I was reading this book the other day, the biography of Numa by Plutarch. And Numa was the second ruler of Rome after Romulus, mythological kind of character. But they talk about this golden age when these people are coming out of, and how they could subsist on water and and view it like they were drinking wine, and they were happy with what they had. And there wasn't this outgoing pursuit of that driving force. And one of the things that characterizes the Iron Age, according to Plutarch, which led to all of this degradation, was the pursuit of pleasure, specifically food and spices, which he identifies as leading to a lot of the ancient colonialism in warfare and all this stuff, right? And it's so true, right? The spice trade is one of the greatest and worst things to ever happen to humanity, right? It's such a wild thing to think about.
Very wild. I even see that, to get a bit nerdy here, in like Warhammer 40K lore, the Eldar race, the Eldari, they dominate the galaxy, and they're a psychic race, and they are become bored and become possessed by excess, and this insane, unsatiable desire for pleasure, combined with their psychic powers, gives birth to a whole being, the Chaos God Slanesh, which is the god of pleasure, of unrestrained pleasure. You know, pleasure with no limits, that devours all
Right.
and destroys them.
Which is so wild. Or makes me think of something like the Cenobites in Hellraiser, right? Why they call this, that word Cenobite, that is referring to a type of monk, you know. So, and these people are out for that abstract pursuit of pleasure in and of itself, that intensity of experience, and it leads them to the most insane ripping of people apart, which is purposefully this Orphic kind of image. What happens to Orpheus, right? He's ripped apart for engaging in the taboo of piracy, and we won't go into all that, but you know what that implies. And
Yeah.
therefore the Maenads rip him apart for this, and it's such a intense thing, right? But Orpheus is also this mystic, right? But wildness. Yeah, that devouring nature of life is such a hard thing to reconcile. It's such an absurd thing. And yet we were all bound to it. I also remember just reading, for most of my life, I was vegetarian for the longest time. And now I'm much more lax on it. But, these are things that have bothered me forever. But I just even remember reading today, though, like plants. A lot of plants commune with each other, and they scream when they're eaten. There's like everything is alive, and nothing wants to be
Well,
destroyed. We cannot exist without destroying something else.
they're intertwined, life and death.
Yeah. Let's continue.
Sure. So this brings us to our new album, which is Insight. We don't have a cover for it, which is why I just have the title here. And the title is like, how to summarize it? It's a play on words of insight and insight. And it's like with the power of the myth, with the power of light in our sight, we gain insight into ourselves and the world around us.
Yeah, wow. Very true.
We have to see the thing laid bare before we can gain true wisdom or knowledge of what that thing is.
Right. And it's that inner sight, right? The sight that's gained from exploring the self knowledge that then grants you the knowledge of the universe, because we are, in fact, a reflection of that universe.
Exactly.
So you putting things in sight too, when you shine a light on something, you remove the imagined, right? You turn things into something that can be faced. That which is horrific becomes far less so when you understand it and confront it as it is, right?
Exactly. It's like giving the name to a demon.
Absolutely. That's how you bind a demon, through the name, through calling. Wow.
So let's go to the first lyric here. This is Firmament. Sublingual absorption, transform this world, one with the stars, slowly falling upward. Short and simple, but not so simple. Uh, so sublingual absorption, this is a reference to ingesting LSD and using it as an entheogen to literally transform the world by altering our perception and gaining insight from this new state of perception.
One
And
with the stars. Love it.
one with the stars slowly falling upward into the firmament, and merging with that divine essence that dwells.
That's beautiful, right? It's that entheogenic transformation that leads one to fall, right? Because this is often how it's funny because we use these words as ascension and enlightenment, but when you read the literature, almost always the enlightenment comes as a natural experience, something that's beyond explanation, that is more embodied and felt, right? And it is almost like a falling. It's almost like a falling into realization. I always think of one of the most famous ones comes to us from the Lotus Sutra, when the Buddha is speaking to one of their students, and the student is frustrated. They cannot understand the sermon. And the Buddha goes, "The sermon's not for you. Come with me." And they walk into a pond. The Buddha picks up a lotus flower. It blossoms in his hand. And as it's blooming, the man achieves enlightenment because he recognized the true reality in that moment, right? Even the Buddha himself, right? He achieves enlightenment when he is racking himself. He's engaged in the most intense forms of asceticism imaginable to try and prove that he's the most powerful yogi. And when he's at the brink of death, a child takes pity on him and feeds him milk, and he willingly accepts it. And it is in that act of grace under the Bodhi tree where he receives the milk that he achieves enlightenment. When he lets go of his own hubris and his own call to self-destruction and discovers that middle path, right? He fell into it.
Fall into it, exactly.
Right?
It's a descent into ourselves, descent into the nature of reality.
Right? And it's also, again, we're seeing this consumption, the eating, absorbing, and it's through the embrace of something else that we are transformed. Interesting imagery.
consuming the other to recognize that we are the other.
right? We're all interconnected.
So this is called confluence, permanent fusion of body, spirit, and mind, floating somewhere between space and time. Transcending despair, your crumpled form will take shape again, braving every storm. Effervescent thoughts collide, phosphorescent lights unite. Utter confusion when faced with any other way. Shatter this illusion in which we will die every day. Transcending despair, your crumpled form will take shape again, braving every storm.
Beautiful.
So confluence, that's like a coming together, emerging. We thought of that; it would be fitting, because the band has really come together as a group now. And it's also about bringing the parts of yourself together, the fusion of the body, spirit, and mind, recognizing that these are not separate things. We are one holistic being, just like the universe is one holistic being, and we are a part of that universe.
The many and the one, right? It's that paradox. We are body, spirit, and mind. You guys are all individuals, but you also are a band. Right?
Yeah,
Beautiful. Just as we as individuals in our body, this is something that we like to be ignorant of, but recognize we're all a billion cells,
yeah.
billions of things working together,
We're
right?
multicellular organisms, and it's a miracle when things conspire together, and create something greater than themselves.
Right? And this is like we can go back into the ancient past. We have that great miracle of the creation of the animal when the cell and the mitochondria merge to form that first symbiotic relation, which becomes the backbone of all animalia going forward. Like that's wild, beyond wild.
So wild. Cells, like you said, the cell itself is a amalgamation of different things that are working in unison. And those are made of particles that are operating, coming together, and it can go smaller and smaller and smaller, and you can go bigger and bigger. It's it's a macrocosm and a microcosm.
Right?
Bal-
And we start to lose sight of everything when we get too small or we get too big. Right? The world becomes all confused. One of the wildest things is when you look into like science, you get into things like quarks, and they always appear in pairs. And anyway, it's just life is so wild and beautiful.
It
Amazing.
is. It
So
is. And these are the first lyrics that I wrote for the album, and it was about recognizing the state that I was in, and this desire to move beyond that. Your crumpled form will take shape again. It's like you've been broken for so long. Put yourself back together. What is going to be the glue? The glue that holds yourself together is love, the love for life, the love for existence, the love for each other, the desire to experience.
yeah, it's so beautiful. No, and you're so right. There's also this great fear of death, but what is death but another transformation? You know, but a saving grace in many ways that allows for growth. You know, that allows for new forms to come through.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we will die one day, and that's not a bad thing.
Again, I'm going back because I've been reading that book, the biography of Numa by Plutarch, and they talking about the golden age, and he was saying the men and the people of the golden age didn't fear death. Instead, they lived their lives to the fullest. They just leapt into experience. They tried things, and if they died, they understood they would be back. You know, That's-
Transform.
exactly. It makes me think too. Like I've been reading lately. I got from my partner. They have a copy, and I've been reading the Tao Te Ching. And
Oh,
who's Lao Tzu but this immortal old man who just goes with the flow, and he's just happy living his life, right?
yeah, it's beautiful. It's like that's why I use this line. utter confusion when faced with any other way. Like, of course I'm gonna live. What other option is there? To end myself? Like, that's not logical. Like, no shame to people that have suffered from suicide. I know people that have been very close to me. It's something I struggle with daily. But I've come to the realization that living is the only thing that makes sense to me.
Right. It's so wild too. That line stood out to me, utter confusion when faced with any other way. Because it also, I know this is not how you intended, but it just makes me think of that idea of trying to expand. Only change is real, and the universe tries to force us to change and to adapt and to grow. But change is so painful and so hard that we have to experience extreme trauma to bring about any change because it's confusing and it's frustrating. And you see it as we get older, it becomes harder and harder and harder, you know? And some people, as they age, they never embrace change. And then they become these people so out of touch with reality, and the present no longer is even understandable to them. You know, it's such
It's
a
so
wild thing. Like, I look at my dad, my dad is getting quite old, but because he's an engineer and he engages with technology, he's like none of his peers. When I talk to his peers, they can't even operate a modern TV. It's like
right.
it's just wild. But that's
It
one of
is.
these things. If we don't continue to adapt and grow and force that change, if we don't,
If we don't engage,
right?
you
You
know,
know,
life is a performance, and it's about engaging with that performance.
yeah. You have to embrace the confusion and accept that you're not fully going to understand and try anyway,
Yes.
right? Beautiful.
Let's keep
And then,
going. Or
yeah,
or
yeah.
so sorry, you had a thought? What's your last thought?
I just love this last line. Transcending despair, your crumpled form, you will take shape again. Recognize, right? This form, this body may decay and everything, but nothing goes away, you know?
Exactly. You'll still be here in the plants and the trees and the air and the water, in other living beings. You're always here. Everything is always here.
Exactly. All right.
So this next one, people will get a kick out of this. Maybe this is called Skene, and for those who listened to the Theastai live stream that we did a while ago, this is an adaptation of a poem from that collection. This costume is tattered and no longer serves a purpose. The robes, the flesh, the spirit, the mask, I am done with it all. Tear me apart, eat all my pieces, but leave my heart. Like a stone in the river, let the chorus sing of my shivers. You shall see my true face.
Oh wow. Immediately I think of Zagreus.
That was the
Eat,
thought.
eat everything but leave my heart, right? The heart and the phallus were left with
Yeah,
Zagreus, but
yeah,
but the heart was what was most important. That was taken up by Zeus, right, and put into a potion to then give to Semele so that he could be reborn as Dionysus. But oh wow, this is wild too. Also, okay, I got to jump back because immediately I saw Zagreus. I had to say something, but let's go right back to the title, Skene. Skene, anyone who watches us or who's been to our lives know this image because it's such a heavy recurring one. But this is the skene is the clitoral hood in a female anatomy, and it is also the tent in the theater where the performers would go in order to both engage in the consumption of entheogens, but also to put on a new costume and to come out reborn into a new figure, usually a deity or as a member of the chorus, right? So there's a
exactly.
lot of wild imagery just in that title of Skene, right? And then we have this costume is tattered and no longer serves a purpose,
It's like
right?
we
That means
we've
we're
been wearing, we've been this costume, we've been this character for too long. The character has said all they need to say. It's time to remove this costume and become the next character. In ancient Greek theater, with the exception of the chorus, there was originally only one actor, and then with Aeschylus there were two actors, and then I believe Sophocles introduced the third actor. And these actors would change between all these different costumes to play the different characters. It was always the same, these singular people playing all the characters. And it gets to a certain point where a character has said all they need to say, it's lay them to rest. The death scenes would occur in the skene as well. It would occur off stage in the skene and not on stage. So it's like a recognition that this character has passed on. I'm done with it all. It's time to don a new character, a new costume.
Right? So wild. Tear me apart, eat all my pieces, but leave my heart. Back to that Zagreus line. But this is such an important line because there's so much going on with that Zagreus myth, right? Zeus becomes the serpent, and then he woos, I'm trying to remember her name, to give birth to Zagreus, right?
Mhm.
And then they put him on the throne so that he could be the next power. And he is distracted off the throne by the Titans, and specifically by the great Empress Hera, right?
Yeah.
How do they do this? They use the magic of Hecate. They use a spinning top, a strophalos, also that wryneck bird. This is really wild Aphroditic Hecatic magic, but this spinning lapis lazuli bird that wails, and that caused Zagreus as a child to go, "Ooh, what the heck is that?" And he jumped for it, and that's when the Titans could rip him apart. And so wild.
I was thinking about Zagreus when I wrote that line. I know that his phallus was also left behind as well, but it's often the heart that people talk about in the mythology, and it also resonated with me with the overall theme of this skene, because it's like the actor is always the actor even when their costume is removed. Even when they're wearing the costume, they're still the actor. There's the heart within the character, and that's what gives the character life.
Beautiful. And then I really liked this line, like a stone in the river, let the chorus sing of my shivers. Which is wild because the stone resists the river, right? The stone doesn't want to move with the river. But what happens? The stone is slowly ripped apart, molded down until it becomes sand and it flows with the river anyway, right?
Exactly. When I was growing up, my dad had this thing above her toilet in her bathroom. It just said, in the constant battle between the stream and the rock, the stream always wins, not through strength, but through persistence. And it's just about the constant eroding, the wearing away of this task, of this obstacle. It will be destroyed. We have to whittle it down grain by grain. And then it becomes part of you. It flows with you.
And that's how that goddess magic always works, right? That slow unfolding across generation. And she wins. She always crushes the mountain. Doesn't matter how tall the mountain is.
Really.
Wild. So, Lady B, the name of this poem is Skene, and all of these poems are by Graham Cwinn here, my dear friend, who is sharing with us the lyrics from his 2 EPs in his upcoming album by his band, the Isosceles Infection. And several of the bandmates are in the chat, so say hi, everyone. Beautiful. Let's continue.
Sure. Now we have new flesh, always becoming and never being. Behold this new flesh I have hewn from my own body. Can you feel the shouting of his bones? The scribbled howling of my mind? Can you hear the crunching of his screams? Always changing, forever healing. Nothing in this world is permanent. Cast yourself into the firmament. From my rotting body, flowers will grow when I am in them, and that is eternity. Always becoming, never being. A constant cycle of death and rebirth, from shadow's end to new dawn's breath. Destitute. Without the necessities of life, this existence is a mockery of who I must become. There's another man beneath my skin. I desire to rip him out of me. From my rotting body, flowers will grow, and I am in them, and that is eternity.
Oh, wow. This is a beautiful one.
Thank you. So this follows on the tail of Scane on the album as well, and it continues the theme of transformation and going within the self, discovering your true self, and ripping away these false notions that you've had of yourself before. And this is an ever-going process. And every moment we perish and are reborn, and it's about this constant cycle of death and rebirth, as we say in the
Yeah.
lyric.
That's so beautiful, right? And immediately I think, what was written on Eleusis? Know thyself. Who wrote it? But Femino, the Pythia herself, daughter of Apollo, right? Most important line in all of Hellenism. And with the ears, you'll see that line repeated everywhere because it is the essence of the entire magical quest, knowing the self. And like you said, it's a shedding of costumes, a shedding of skin, and it's a revealing, and it's a recognition. What are we but the perceiver? But that vision, the one who sees. And again, we're back to that magic of the sight. And what allows the sight but that light? And that light from our eyes comes from where and who? What is the power behind the sun? The sun is the child of Isis. Isis is the moon, the true sun. Right? Anyway, I'm going off into
I love it.
mythology
I love
wonderland.
it. Beautiful. Beautiful. And
Amazing.
people might recognize this line from my rotting body. Flowers will grow, and I'm in them, and that is eternity. This is written. This was written by Edvard Munch, the painter.
Oh, beautiful.
And
I
I thought it's just such a beautiful line, and I thought it was important for the theme of the lyrics. So for any Monk fans out there, he did the Scream and many, many dozens, hundreds of other beautiful paintings and drawings. Um, there you go. A little nugget for those fans.
Wow, beautiful. I love it. And this imagery is just so intense. There's another man beneath my skin. I desire to rip him out of me. That ego death, right? Killing of the constructed self, the self that exists as that object of survival, a product of culture, society, and anxiety, to reveal the true self, right? Wild.
Similarly, it's like, lobsters or snakes or anything that sheds. Once they grow and grow until they're uncomfortable within their own skin or carapace. And then they shed that outer layer so that they can and grow a new one that fits them, right? It's about this constant changing and growing and recognizing that our true self is the ever changing
Yeah. I've talked
act.
about this a lot, right? One of the beautiful things about the snake and that snake imagery is to think about who we are as a being that exists across time. And if you were to try and imagine how you would look as a being across time, you would not be a single individual, but rather you would be a snake of experience through time. And you are that one that has experienced. And that vision of you, what it is, transforms as it snakes through the path. And each one of those moments, right, is a self, right? The Buddha is really famous for this. He describes that all that exists is momentary, and all we are but those moments, right? And as soon as the focus is lost, we die in that moment and are reborn anew. And there is some bit of truth to this, And there is also truth, though, that we are that unfolding. We are the many and the one. We are both the limited and the total. And that's so profound.
It's a beautiful duality.
Wow, love it. Let's continue.
Sure. So this next one is called Myth, or it has a secondary title of Insight. This is the title track on the album. I'll just read it and then we can talk about it. Sacred forms revealed to me. I kneel before the great tree. I plead for forgiveness and the strength to live. Nature grants my wish. The river murmurs with myth. Surrounded by animals and stones, I drink from its waters. Surrounded by animals and stones, the river murmurs with myth. I shudder as we intertwine. Flesh merges with the divine. Revel in the garden of delight, marrow fusing to create new life. Surrounded by animals and stones, I drink from its waters.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
So this again, the full title is Myth Insight, and it's about embracing the myth to gain insight. And it's recognizing that the myth is all around us. The myth is a living thing. The myth is in rocks and trees, it's in animals, it's in plants, it's in us, it's in the air.
It's that
And
animating story, right?
exactly. And it's about drinking. I drink from its waters. I consume the myth. I embrace the myth.
That's so beautiful because myth, the mystery, you know, it's this idea, right? The power of story and the creation of story that sustains. And it is story, and it's that sharing of experience that is so profound. So much about life is about that sharing, right? It's about embracing experience, analyzing it, learning from it. But the creation of art, the creation of myth, embodying the myth and the story, it's about expanding that meaning to ever greater heights. What can myth do that simple story cannot? Right? Myth becomes this transcendent form that can encompass all meaning, that can evolve with the reader, that takes on new life with each iteration. It becomes a living thing. It is animated through the power of story, and it animates us, right? We are the stories we tell. And the universe is all out here trying to speak. It all has a voice, especially if you lend yours to the song and you harmonize with it. And what you perceive becomes a part of that grander myth. Anyway, beautiful stuff.
Please
Love
said. Way, way, way more eloquent than I can put it. So thank you.
but I don't know. I shudder as we entwine, flesh merges with the divine, revel in the garden of delight, marrow fusing to create new life. That's the whole thing right there. Coming together for that purposes of divine creation, sharing our perspectives, sharing ourselves to create a new thing that is greater and unique and respectable in its own right. New life that is greater than all of us, right? And not simply children, but creation, buildings, art, everything, thought, music, dance, right? Creation is so multifaceted, and it's about producing into that future, bringing about new generation, new life, and change. Powerful.
Exactly.
The myth unfolds the mystery of life, right? It's that sharing of story.
With the myth in sight, we gain insight.
Beautiful. With the myth in sight, we gain insight. How
That,
true.
yeah, that's kind of the overarching theme behind the title of the album.
I love it. That's really profound, Graham. Amazing. Let's continue here.
Sure. So this is Confluence Part 2. So this is we'll see a couple lines repeated from the first one. Encased within this womb, I have formed around myself, envisioned a cocoon in which to restore my health, reduced to a liquid, preparing to rebuild. Transcending despair, your crumpled form will take shape again. Energy and matter coalesce into something greater than this. Bursting from the gloom, I spread my glistening wings, discard the silken tomb, the taste of everything. Utter confusion, shatter this illusion, reduced to a liquid, preparing to rebuild.
Such incredible, powerful, beautiful imagery here. Man, the butterfly, the moth, right? They, like you just pointed out, they literally completely destroy their form. They become nothing but a soup and are remade entirely remade. And often when they become the butterfly, they're remade for a single purpose. There are several species of moths and butterfly that can't even consume. All they can do is go get laid. Like, it's such a wild life. But it shows how, we're not so different than other forms of life. The transformations are just not as apparent. They're not as immediate. We may not be reduced to goo, but you were goo in your mother's womb. you know, and you will become goo when you die. you
This
know?
this piece was originally titled Chrysalis, and I thought that was a bit too on the nose. So since it repeats some of the lyrics from Confluence, we decided to call it Confluence Part Two. But that still works. It's merging, reduced to parts, and then coming together again.
Beautiful. Absolutely. I love it. Yeah, this was a fun one. Great.
Thanks. This is the last one, and this is also the last song with lyrics on the album. There's a little outro, but this is the last full song. It's called This Fire. And can you see the shadows moving on the wall? Is there any purpose in living at all? My brain is not well, and it devours me. Embers searing, demons leering. Let this fire consume them all. Flames are burning, gods are yearning. Let this fire raise them all. Can you see the shadows moving on the wall? Is there any purpose in living at all? My brain is not well, and it devours me. The hole in my chest must be removed. With each day of rest, my health improves. I draw strength from the earth. Planets refuse to sing my dirge. Will this fire in me burn for long?
Oh, wow.
So this is a very personal piece. As I mentioned before on some of our other streams, I've attempted to take my own life 5 times, and I've failed each time. And there's been some other close encounters as well that I don't consider full-on attempts. And again, it's always been this fire in me that this desire to persist that has carried me through these moments. It's like the planets refuse to sing my dirge. This isn't my time.
I see. That's so intense. When I see this imagery here, the shadows moving on the wall is the purpose in living at all. Are you drawing upon that imagery of Plato in the allegory of the cave?
It's partly Plato, partly Psychosis. It's a bit of a interplay between the two. Seeing the shadows moving on the wall, is there any purpose in living at all? Is what we experience just these illusions dancing before us, or is there something greater to experience?
Right. Can you ever see what's behind the puppetry?
Can you
Can you ever
the
see what's
hand
casting these shadows?
exactly?
Right.
Exactly.
And that frustration of not being able to see the truth and wanting to just give up and burn it all down. But you persist because there's something to those images, right? There's something
Exactly.
here. It's not
Knowing
as frustrating as it appears.
exactly the fire within is a comfort. It's like sitting by the bonfire for a while before moving on. It's about regaining your strength, warming yourself. It's about the will. you know
Beautiful.
Prometheus giving the fire the reason, the tools to keep living.
I love it. I also love this. I draw strength from the earth. You know, it's this, that connection to nature and the connection to the world around you and to the physical reality is what gives you that fire too, that kindles that fire.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we are one with the earth and partaking in that symbiotic relationship.
Wow. And that's where the generation comes. This was beautiful, Graham. That was amazing. Is there any final thoughts you want to leave the audience with for the poetry?
I guess that, you know, how to put this simply or in not a roundabout way. um, there will always be pain and suffering in life. Life is suffering, as Buddha said, but there's more than just suffering. There's
There's
beauty,
love.
love, exactly. And it's about holding on to that love, finding what you love. Why are you here? There's something that you love about being here, otherwise you wouldn't be here. So it's about finding that and holding on to it and letting it warm you.
That's so beautiful, profound, amazing. So, Graham, when are we going to see this lyrical collection and how can people purchase it? And when is the new album coming out?
So the lyric book will coincide with the release of the album, which will be, we don't have a set day yet, but sometime this winter is what we've been talking about as a band. And I'll be posting updates related to that in the Discord. So the lyric booklet will coincide with the release of the album. It'll be available on the Bandcamp as well as through my personal press, Things in My Chest. It will likely be a limited edition since it's hardcover and expensive to print.
Absolutely. A nice little collectible, though. Beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, it'll be a nice little tribute to what we've accomplished so far.
Right. I love it. I'm looking forward to it so much. So, Graham, before we call it an evening, what other projects have you been working on? What can people look for and find from you? What's going on lately?
So I've finally finished formatting the covers for Theastai as well as Hidayeth, which are two collections that we've talked about on the channel before that were supposed to come out in like July, but I was plagued by some technological problems, which I finally sorted out. And those books, I've already sent them to the printer. I'll have copies later next week.
Amazing. So make sure you guys go check out Things in My Chest, Graham's publication house. He was going to have a few new publications by next week at the earliest. And we have talks where we dived into both. How do you say it's Theastai and
Hidayeth.
Hiriath? And we did deep dives into both of those poetry collections. Lots of fun. We don't spoil everything either. So you'll still get a bunch of poems with each of these collections. And, we love Graham's work here. Is there anything else that you're working on that is yet to come out that people can look forward to?
Just my graphic novel. I'm acquiring a scanner in the near future, and then I can finally transfer all 310 pages to digital. And that will be coming out still at the end of January is my release date that I have set for that. It's a big project. It'll have been in the works for 8 years by the time of its publication. And I'm very greatly looking forward to seeing that chapter come through.
Closed,
Yeah.
right? Amazing. Yeah, no, that was so fun. We did a deep dive about that too. I'm looking forward to part 2 because this project doesn't end either.
Yeah, I'm
It takes
working
on
on
a new form.
a sequel because my brain just never shuts up. It's always like, but what if?
And Graham, tell them about your black metal industrial project. What was it? Something dirge.
Right, Imperial Dirge.
Thank
It's
you.
a project I do with a guy down in Kentucky, and we started with a couple industrial releases. One of them has a bit of grindcore sprinkled into it, harsh industrial, harsh noise, very much like Skinny Puppy, Ministry, things like that. And then our latest release, The Severed Tongue of Orpheus, had a much more black metal leaning to it in the sound. And there's lyrics, about orphism.
As you'd expect.
As you would expect, as well as one of the songs is about Unica Zern, actually, who we've discussed on her channel before. It's called The Man of Jasmine, as a nod to her book.
People should check out that talk we did on Searching for Dragons. Unica Zern is so wild, and The House of Illnesses is such an intense book. And we will probably do more Unica Zern in the future just because she's so much fun.
Very likely.
All right, Graham. Well, this was had such a blast. Thank you for sharing your lyrics with us and your poetry. And everyone, please make sure to support the Isosceles Infection. You can find their Bandcamp below. You can find all of Graham's links below in his link tree. Make sure to check out his poetry house. Any last words, Graham, before we call it?
Embrace the myth.
Embrace the myth. I love it. Amazing. Peace and love, everyone. Take care. And I hope I see you again soon. And please support Graham. Bye for now.